Can you hear me now? All right. Yeah, we're going to be going over the basic rules of the moot because it's important to know what those are too, and some also basic sort of how to build an argument itself. So first, we'll introduce our other speaker, Suleiman Ramiz. He works here in Abu Dhabi. He's from Sri Lanka and participated in the moot many years ago. And you can finish your introduction.
Yeah. Hi. All you need to know is my name is Suleiman. I sat where you sat a couple of years ago. At least I thought until Gada pointed out that she's been involved in the mood for 7 years. And I was like, sheesh. Okay, so I don't even want to think about what Robbie and Professor Brand have to say about that. I mean, yeah, generation. Yeah. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be here, and let's see what we can do about oral advocacy. So I work as a lawyer here in Abu Dhabi for a local firm called Saloom and Partners. I'm an arbitration and transactional consultant. What it basically means is I'm supposed to do arbitrations, but when we have no arbitrations, I do contracts. So it's kind of the perfect fit for what the moot is always about.
So the first basic is you have to be on time. The arguments start at a certain time. If you're late and the arbitrators are there, it comes off as unprofessional and you will get a worse score as a result. It's a big part of being a lawyer, surprisingly, is scheduling things and being on time for those things. It's extremely important that you're available and on time in your career as a lawyer. You're literally billed by the minute. So it's important that you are actually here on time, and the students who aren't going to benefit from what we're talking about until they show up. So take advantage of this opportunity and be on time. And also coffees for people who are on time. So if you don't show up on time, you get coffee afterwards. Okay, so first we're talking about the oral argument basics. Does this thing actually work? Great. So like I said, first we're going to go over the rules of the roads. This is just the generalized structure of how your arguments work. The vis moot rule is just to make sure we're all on the same page and understand what we're talking about. Then we're going to help you build an oral argument and then end with just a little bit of sage wisdom from some Moody's. Okay, so first, number one, most important thing is you absolutely must read the vis moot rules. You must. There are lots of details in there and things that matter. I'm going to highlight one particular rule during this presentation, but you've got to read the rest. They are the rules of the road, and you need to follow them in order to compete successfully. What's going to happen in Vienna or Hong Kong when you participate is there are 4 general rounds, meaning you have 2 arguments as claimant and 2 arguments as respondent, and everyone is scored by every arbitrator, and you're going to add up those scores to determine who makes it then to the elimination rounds, which is this round of 64, which you probably have heard us talk about or have heard others talk about. The elimination rounds are of the 400 teams that participate, 64 then go into a head-to-head matchup bracket style elimination rounds until they win. There's different strategies for general rounds versus elimination rounds. General rounds is really what we're teaching you here. The elimination rounds, as you develop your skills in your arguments, you have to actually win the argument versus get the best score that you can. So strategy can be a little bit different. We're less interested in strategy. We're more interested in getting you to understand the law in your arguments. So we'll help you with that part. And then at the end of the week is the final award ceremony where there's the final argument. I highly encourage you to attend that. If for nothing else, you can watch the final argument and say, it's not that good. You know, they're not that good. But also you get to watch them feed like 4,000 people for a really fancy dinner all at once, and it's quite impressive. So I really like that part. The argument itself, you have 2 pleaders per team, as I'm sure you know, 1 procedural pleader, 1 applicable law pleader. And you have 30 minutes per side that can be allocated in theory however you want in order for your arguments to be most persuasive. But the way you're going to do it is 14 minutes with 1 minute for rebuttal and surrebuttal for each pleader. That's how you're going to split your 30 minutes. And the reason why is that's very much the norm in the moot, and deviating from that norm can freak out the arbitrators because they don't expect you to do anything differently. So this is, I think, is probably the way you're going to end up doing that kind of thing. The first thing that happens when you do an argument is you have to agree on the order of the proceedings. Like we talked about, arbitration is about consent and about party autonomy, and that includes the arbitral procedure. So when you come into the room, the first thing you have to do is meet your opposing counsel and agree on an order. What is the problem that's going to arise this year regarding the agreement on the order of proceedings? Does anyone have an idea what the order should be?
I think this year it's going to end up being respondent procedural and claimant procedural, then respondent substantive and claimant substantive, because procedural is dealing with jurisdiction and the applicable law is a dispute as well.
Great. Anybody have another idea? Let me go back here.
Thank you. I would agree with the respondent order, but I would say merits should start because the applicable law should be should
Well,
be
just to be
proved.
clear, is there a merits dispute? Are we dealing with the merits at all?
No, merits respondent should start.
Okay, well, it's important to be precise about these things, right? We're not dealing with the merits, right? What are we dealing with?
Substance, you mean?
The applicable law.
Applicable law.
Right, it's that,
Yeah.
right, yeah.
Because of the applicable law issue, merits respondent should start, and claimant claimant merits would continue, and respondent should argue the jurisdiction, and claimant should prove that the arbitral tribunal have the jurisdiction.
So we have at least two approaches. Is there a third? We have another one here.
The applicable law first, respondent starts followed by claimant. And then for procedural aspect, it should be the issue with regards to the admissibility of the exhibits and then the jurisdiction, because Exhibit C7 is relevant to determine the admissibility of the claim as well.
Great. Any other ideas? Okay, so this is going to be itself contentious, right? Reaching this agreement is itself going to be a thing. You're going to meet two strange students that you've not met before, and you're going to have to agree before you walk in the room what the order is going to be. So we need to think about that approach, what order you want, why you want it, and how to reach an agreement with the other side when you fundamentally disagree, because you're going to have to figure that out. I strongly encourage you to reach an agreement, because if you walk into the room as the students and you go into your arbitration beginning with no members of the tribunal, we have not agreed on the order of procedure, it might lead to a frustration on behalf of the tribunal. They'd rather you agree. They'll hear your arguments. You'll have to present why you want either side to start, and they'll make a decision, and then that'll be what you're subject to. But as arbitration is about consent's a much better way of dealing with that rather than being subject to the decision of the arbitrators, right? So you want to reach that agreement, think about what you want to do.
Can I quickly chip in there? So two things. One is about being on time, right? Of course you need to be on time, but there's also this element of kind of stepping into the room early as possible. Sometimes you're not able to do this because you have rounds back to back and some rounds stretch out. So you're kind of running last minute to the room. But if that's not the case, it's always good to go early, because you would see when you do the oral matchups and during the pre-mode, it's nice to get a sense of the room, where you're seated. You'll have your teammates come and place your placards. You get comfortable, there's a sense of confidence that comes, versus you walking into the room, seeing your learned counsel on the other side, and they're already set up, and then you're like, oh, we're sort of the visitors. So that's one. Try and go early so you can get familiar and you can get comfortable. The second thing about the matchups, not the matchups, the order of speaking, and I've witnessed this several times during the mode, right? So generally, as you progress towards the oral round, there will be a consensus. 90% of the people would say this is going to be the order, respondent first, claimant second, or whatever it is that year's moot problem presents. But there will be the odd ones that say, no, that's not what we want, and they'll have good reasons to back it up, right? Because we've pulled this in the past. And the reason they do this is to shift your balance, because you might be ready to respond, or you might be ready to make your pleading, but you won't be ready to when the roles swap. So make sure when you do your prep, you're ready for both. And I agree with Robbie 100%. You don't want to give a sense to the arbitrator that there's no agreement, but that does not mean you should be pushed around, because some teams might come and say, we want the order the other way around, and they might not have sound logic to back it up just because they want to be pushy. That's where you stand your ground, because you know that you have super arguments to give the tribunal as to why you should go respondent first or claimant first, as the moot problem decides, right? So you have to play it by ear and be smart at the moment and see what exactly the position is. Perhaps you can have a chat about this with your coaches beforehand as to what you're going to do, depending on what team suggests what, if at all there is a contention. 99% of the time, it's not going to happen. Everyone's going to go with the flow. Everyone's going to be super nervous. They're not going to worry about the order of speaking. They just want to make their arguments. But be aware.
And you'll be doing this week for the pre-moot too, so be ready to do that. The time allocation includes questions from the arbitrators, so we're going to eat up your time and you're going to be frustrated, but it's part of that 14 minutes, which is why when we talk about your arguments, you have to control the tribunal. You can request extensions of time, which we've talked about. Scoring is a little bit of a black box, so you get a score from 50 to 100. The important thing to know is you get a score from every arbitrator. So every pleader gets 3 individual scores from each arbitrator, and you add up all of those points at the end of the day to find out whether you make it to the round of 64. The strategy thing that's important to remember here is you're talking to all of us. When you have a tribunal that includes me and really probably any 2 other people, I'll probably be asking most of the questions, and the other 2 might be completely silent. That does not mean you give an argument to me. You give it to all 3 of us because we're all here making a score for you. That's important. Okay. This is one of the rules that's important. It actually is in the rules of the moot that you cannot overstate the facts. It says that the facts that exist in the moot problem are a logical conclusion of the facts in the moot problem or publicly available are the universe of facts that are available to you. You cannot overstate the facts, and that's super important. This is the setup. You might have seen it before. I just want you to actually show you visually what it might look like. It's 3 tables. You've got your 3 arbitrators here. The key here, I put the procedural person up here first because generally speaking, the procedural issues go first, but we're not sure. The closer to the tribunal is usually who you want to start, but that's not always the case. That's usually how you want to do it. The key thing to think about is you're not facing directly in front of the arbitrators, you're kind of turned when doing it. So you have to think about your posture and how that works. And then you'll have an audience, which you will not notice at all. You'll be far too busy. So don't worry about the fact that people are watching you. You won't even notice them at all. Okay, building your argument. I thought we had longer time, and as the person who made the schedule, I should probably have known that we don't have that as much time as I thought. So we're going to run through this a little bit quicker. When you're building your argument, there are sort of, in my mind, at least 5 components of knowledge that you need in order to make your argument. One is know who you are. What do you think we mean by this? Know who you are. Someone have a microphone back there?
Means you have to know from which position you're speaking. So if you're claimant, you have to know what green hydro is, what are their concerns, what do they want to achieve, what's the background of the project, why did they decide to enter into the contract, and just all the details surrounding that profile, kind of the claimant profile.
Great. And that's exactly right. And you have to let it inform the nature of your argument, right? If you're the respondent, you're a state-owned entity, you've been appointed by government officials, you have this new energy strategy, it should inform the nature of your argument because being persuasive is to have stake in the argument. It's important to have that. Knowing the facts, I think, is a given, but at the level that we expect you to know the facts is not necessarily a given. Your factual knowledge is a closed universe, right? It's those 60 pages or 55 pages of the moot problem plus industry knowledge outside of the problem that you're able to identify to inform yourself of what's going on, right? You should know those comprehensively and have them at the tip of your fingers. When someone asks, where in the record does it say X, Y, or Z, you should be able to pull that out immediately. That takes a lot of practice. I'm confident you can do it, but it requires reading the problem regularly from start and using it quite a lot. Know what your client wants. Who can tell me what claimant wants? Right here. Do we have a microphone?
The continuation of the project and not terminating the contract.
Anything else?
That's his main goal.
They'd like a chance to showcase their PM technology and to hopefully expand their market share.
Great. They also probably don't want to get arrested anymore, right? That's got to be pretty annoying. What does respondent want? Back here. Do we have a... Got it? Thanks.
Respondent wants to terminate the agreement with the claimant.
Do they?
Yeah.
Does anybody disagree? In the back? You again.
Yeah, I'm sorry. They would like a price reduction at least 2 digits or 50%.
Yeah, they might actually want the deal.
exactly about this point. We know that this is also something that the respondent wants, but can we mention it? Because it seems to me that they want it, but it should go a little bit not disclosed because they're doing it in a way that can be considered be unfair. So we know
Yeah.
that they want it, but can we put forward or
Well,
not?
there's another reason that you kind of have trouble saying out loud what it is that they want, and it goes to this, right? We're trying to interpret what it is that respondent wants, but it's hard to say respondent wants this if it doesn't exist in the facts of the problem, right? So my point here is not that you need to be able to say this is what the respondent wants. It's that when you're developing your argument, these kinds of things are the components of your knowledge that you need to be able to make an argument. If you don't know what your client wants or haven't determined what your client wants, you're not going to be able to be persuasive because you won't know where you can give up in your argument, what hills you have to die on, that kind of thing. So figure out what your client wants comprehensively, both in the remedy that they're seeking, but also in general in the outcome of the case. Do they want a paycheck? Do they want to just walk away? How do they want that structured? And be able to advocate on behalf of your client in that situation. And it might be difficult to see how that applies, for example, to the applicable law problem or the evidentiary problems, but it does, and you need to understand those connections. Know why they want it. We talked about this yesterday. Why do you want the CISG to apply or not apply, right? For the sake of time, we'll not go through that one, but it's an important argument, and we're going to be talking about that throughout. Why do you want certain evidence in? Why do you want to go to mediation? Understand why you want that, because you'll be able to be more persuasive when you understand why you want something, not just that you want something. You understand? And of course, know the law, right? But the law does not mean just the cases or the commentaries. It's the entire universe of the law, and importantly, the policy underlying each of these legal principles. If this goes similar to the why, but we need to know the why of the law. Why is it that we sometimes are enforcing mediation agreements and not? Why is it that there are exclusions for certain kinds of evidence in certain circumstances? What are the interests that are being protected by those protections and why, right? Understand that, and it'll give you much more flexibility, and you'll be a much better researcher because you'll know what you're looking for and can find better cases, those kinds of things.
Can I just quickly chip into the why there? So in addition to knowing why you want what the client wants, or knowing what the client wants, that's the bigger picture, right? So you generally know that they have a hydro project, they want it to continue, so on and so forth. But you also need to know why it's important for you to win the particular issue that you're arguing. So, for example, if you're going to argue for CISG, you need to know why you want CISG, what is in the CISG that's to your benefit. And it applies across the board to all the issues. So if you don't know the why, because arbitrators ask this quite frequently in the mood, they'll be like, counsel, why do you want this point? Is it all right if you rule in favor of the other side? And then you're a bit stuck, So you want to avoid that, and you generally want to have a really good understanding of why the issue is important to you.
How these work in concert, right? So for example, if you say, why do you need this piece of evidence to be admissible? And you say, it's essential to my proving my case. Then the next obvious question is going to be is, do you lose if it is not admissible, right? Then you don't want to admit that, right? Unless it's true, but you need to understand the nature of what you're arguing so that you can know where to fight hard, where to give up, where to really focus your research and build your arguments. So these are sort of the broad components of knowledge that I think contribute to good arguments. All right, so these are the components of an argument. We'll run through them really briefly. The introduction, if y'all I think I sent it to the coaches. I don't remember if I sent it to all the teams, but I sent a short Word document that sort of describes how to build out the structure of an introduction and roadmap. The introduction is formal, right? In certain components, it's my name is Robbie Chimino and I represent the Green Hydro PLC. But also, you'll need to say what part you're going to be doing, introduce your co-counsel. This part is pretty well scripted, and I think you should practice it and be able to go through this introduction as scripted. You'll see it in that Word document I sent, but you can also see examples online for these arguments. It's pretty well standardized. The key part that isn't standardized is your hook. So the introduction ends with answering the question, why are we here today? And you answer that question quite expressly, we are here today because, and then tell the tribunal why they're here. This introduction should be encompassing of both pleaders' arguments. Your introduction should not conflict with theirs, and it should help to inform their argument. If you're a responsive party and you're really slick, you can take the first party's theme and use it against them, right? You can use those kinds of tools to be persuasive. Building an introduction is, again, both scripted, but also super difficult, even though it's one sentence. We are here today because can be a really difficult thing to do. Test some stuff out, see what works, and find out how to do it. Roadmaps, to me, this is basically the argument. This is the part that we're going to spend most of our time on, the things that really matter, because you're providing an argument that's super complicated and it's easy to confuse the tribunal. The roadmap will let us know what you're going to say. And I always talk about Professor Fleckner, who sings that song, when he shows us how important the roadmap is, because when you're doing your roadmap, he's got his little mustache and he's watching you with his little pen and paper. And you say, first, I'll be discussing this. And he goes and writes it down and then comes back up again, right? So when you do your roadmap, he's quite literally writing down what you're going to say and can follow your argument along and make sure you hit your points, right? And the reason why he does that sort of performative writing thing, one, is because he's adorable, but two, because he wants you to know, I'm doing something, give me a moment, right? When you give your roadmap, don't plow through the arbitrator writing it down because they can't hear you. So you'll say, first, we will demonstrate that this evidence is admissible and this evidence is not, and they'll write that down and just sit silently. It'll feel weird for the first couple of times, but wait for them to come back up and show that they're listening again. And second, that the claim is not admissible or lacks jurisdiction, whatever your argument is, right? So the roadmap's super important. You'll also be doing sub-roadmaps. So you'll say, first, we're doing evidence. Second, we're doing jurisdiction. Turning now to my first submission, we will show that this evidence is admissible and this is not in 3 parts. First, that this is true. Second, that this is true. Third, that this is true, right? So be able to develop your main roadmap and your sub roadmaps as you continue, which will try to help you guys do that in the next couple of days.
Just very quickly on the sub roadmaps thing, I've seen some teams, they tend to give the entire roadmap on the first go, and then again, they repeat themselves when they come to the first argument, right? So like Robbie correctly said, you just want to touch on the key bits or the primary issues, and then when you say, I'm turning now to my first issue, then you can go into the sub roadmap. Otherwise, you're a bit repetitive. Also, very quickly on the introduction, there are several schools of thought because there's no one size fits all. You'd see that when it comes to demeanor and the way you present yourself, some people have a poker face. You can't see any expression, you can't see any feeling, and that's one school of thought when it comes to being a lawyer and argumentative. The other school of thought, and I suppose that's more arbitration friendly, is to smile and say, good morning, Mr. or Mrs. Arbitrator, so and so. So you want to pick a style that suits you and your personality. There's no one approach that this is going to work for you. If it doesn't feel comfortable, you don't want to do it.
Next is the body of the argument. This is where you're actually making your argumentation. And the biggest component of this is you're fielding questions from the arbitrators. We talked about this a little bit yesterday. We'll work on this in your practice arguments and kind of throughout today and tomorrow. You'll get good at this. I'll say the first rule of answering questions is you must actually answer the question. And the best way to do that is to say yes or no, right? Is it true that this is something, something, something? Yes, Madam Arbitrator. However, blah, 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 right? Don't do what I used to do, which is say, well, if you see in this case, blah, 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 blah. I'm not really answering the question. I'm sort of going into a longer description. Answer the question, then support your answer. Conclusions are super important too, for a couple of reasons. One, again, arbitrators are easily confused. It's really helpful to say, therefore, the tribunal lacks jurisdiction. Turning now to my next submission, right? You've got to conclude your argument so we understand remember who you are, because as you might get to understand, we sometimes forget if you're claimant or respondent because we're focusing on the legality of your argument and forget what outcome you're looking for. That can really help us remember that remedy, and it gives structure to your argument to where we know, okay, I can dump that out of my mind and focus now on your next part. So you've got to have that conclusion. Rebuttals, the long and short of this is rebuttals are short. Do you have a question?
I have a question about the conclusion. So is it that the last speaker of the teams, do they give the conclusion like the overall as like the request for relief, or do they just state their points again, like as a summary?
Here, I think Robbie meant just the conclusion for your argument. So you make your argument and then you kind of wrap it up saying, and this is why we believe the evidence should be admissible.
I think it's cool when the last pleader concludes for everyone, right? Because when you finish your full argument, it's cool if you're the person doing applicable law, and you like get to the end of your 13 minutes and 40 seconds, and you say, therefore, members of the tribunal, as is presented by my co-counsel, this tribunal lacks jurisdiction over the claim is inadmissible. This evidence should be admitted. This shouldn't. The CISG should apply in that. It might sound too long, right? But it's kind of cool when you remember, oh, you're on a team and you're both representing the entire claim here, right? So you can think about how to do that conclusion to really, that one's mine, yeah. How to do that kind of argument, right? So rebuttals, the long and short of it is you get 1 point on rebuttal. I cannot emphasize this enough. You get 1 point on rebuttal. I once was in an argument and the party said, we have 4 points on rebuttal. And the tribunal was like, oh my goodness, because you only got 1 minute, right? Tribunals are also tired. They've heard the arguments, right? They're going to forget that rebuttals are going to happen, and they're going to be confused when you have to do that. And you'll actually see the demeanor of the arbitrators change. They'll be like, okay, rebuttals, okay, you got 1 minute, okay, you got 1 minute, and now we can continue. So short, direct, your job is to have a single material point to the other side's arguments. Not they said a name wrong, not they got a fact slightly right. It's got to be material to their arguments. Don't be pedantic, be material.
It's got to be like a mic drop.
Yeah, the best ones, the way you gain points on a rebuttal is you just take the air out of the room, right? The best rebuttal I've ever heard was somebody said that the opposing counsel suggests that it's wrong that this principle should apply in this situation, but that's not the case. And on the SIR rebuttal, the person said, members of the tribunal, I'm not saying that my opposing counsel is wrong. Ingeborg Spencer is, the UNCITRAL model law is, the New York Convention, and they went and like listed all the ways that they were wrong. And everybody was like, oh my, that's the way you gain points. That is extremely difficult and a rare thing to be able to do. You can seek for it, but the goal really is to focus on getting a single material point subject to their dispute. And then teamwork. This is a performative aspect of the moot, but it's very important. You'll have a single shared binder that you work on with each other. You need to help each other with time and make sure you hit that time really solidly, and help each other do things like turn the pages. You also should be enthusiastic about your partner's argument, nod their head when they're making good points, show curiosity in the tribunal's questions, take notes and help them with answers, prepare rebuttals and surrebuttals as you go along. You're going to get a lot of feedback about this, so I just wanted to indicate that to you, but it's an important part of the argument.
Very quickly on teamwork, something you shouldn't do when you're showing expression is you don't want to act surprised when an arbitrator asks a question. You wouldn't be like, oh my God, how dare you ask that question from my co-counsel? You want to keep it chill. Curiosity in a sense, like that's an interesting question. So you would nod and then look or turn to your co-counsel so that, my co-counsel knows what they're talking about. They're going to respond to you now. That sort of collaborative expression.
I had my co-counsel one time. I had a very difficult question asked. My co-counsel looked at me like I had just been like kicked in the face. He was like, oh no. That's not ideal, Okay, building an argument on the substance. You need to, IRAC is a good catch-all structure, right? IRAC is generally still available to you in the oral argument. It's not as strictly need to be followed, but it helps you still develop it. Your roadmap is the I, or people do like CRAC or other versions, right? But your roadmap is identifying the issues. Your rule is the first part of each section of your argument, right? The evidence should be admitted because the IBA rules are applicable, and under Rule X, the evidence should be admitted, right? You identify the rule. The analysis, you do that analysis, tell them why that rule applied to your situation leads to the outcome that you want, and then conclude, you have your conclusion, right? It's still the same part of how to do a legal argument. It's just restructured for the purposes of oral argument. This is something we talked about yesterday. You have to know your legal standard and live by it, right? So for example, to exclude the CISG, you have to demonstrate a manifest clear intent to exclude, according to the CISG Advisory Council opinion. If that's the standard you want to use, understand it completely, develop that standard clearly, and live by that standard, and make sure that it's being applied and not being watered down or changed as you go along your argument.
Wait, what? A good way to explain to the tribunal as to how you meet the standard is to give them an example of something that does not meet the standard. So you can say, this is an example where there's no manifest intention to exclude, and it's kind of implied, right? So this is similar to what we have in the contract, and therefore it doesn't meet the standard. So you can sort of take an opposite approach of what's not there.
Right. Burden shifting, what this means is you must know your burden. It's similar to knowing the standard, right? Who has the burden to show something and how high is that burden? Ideally, they have the burden and it's super high, or you have the burden and it's super low, right? Then there are certain kinds of burdens that shift. So you have like an initial burden to demonstrate something, but if you demonstrate that, they then have a new burden to overcome it, right? You need to understand what your burden is and be able to shift it to the other party or lower your burden or increase theirs, and it will make it a much more persuasive argument. Concentrate your fire. What I mean by this is sort of what we talked about before, defend the defensible and focus on things that are material to the outcome that you're seeking. Don't die on every single hill. Don't look to like make this an auction that's excluded by the CISG unless it's the hill that you really want. That's the thing that you can really defend it that way, but don't defend things that are on the edges or not material or substantive to the point that you need to make. Same thing with the legal rule is similar to the standard and burden. Figure out the rule that you need to apply and apply it. Our job is to craft rules applicable to our problem that we want the tribunal to put in their award in our favor, right? That's what tribunals are looking for. So when you're developing your argument, you need to say, for example, manifest clear intent to exclude. To be manifest, it needs to be this. To be clear, it needs to be this. Here, it is both manifest and clear, and here's why, right? Develop that rule, make it crystal clear, and enforce it. Give them a chance to do that so they can write an award in your favor with a clear delineated rule. And then use everything, all the tools in your toolbox. Use the text of law and the rule and the problem, use precedent, practice, and really importantly, use policy so they understand we're not making a technical argument, we're making one that matters. But it takes a while to get to that, so you got to do that research.
Out of curiosity, do you all know how burden works and what burden is?
Does anybody not know?
Yeah,
I didn't
that's the
think about
question.
that. What it means to carry a burden.
Like burden is given provided for the parties to prove something, like burden of proof for the exclusion of CAG on the respondent side. Like
Yeah, so you have your burden of proof, and then you have the standard of proof that you need to meet in order to satisfy your burden. Everyone knows how that works, right? Fantastic.
Okay, great. If you have questions, please ask us about that. I know we're kind of running through because we want to get to the meat here. Style is something you're going to get more feedback about than anything else. Coaches, I strongly encourage you not to focus on style and feedback, because the style is something that everyone else is going to help you with. You're going to get all kinds of style questions, but your style can be informed by the strength of your argument. When you know your argument, your style, your confidence comes across, right? These kinds of things are super important, but are not meant to be like finely honed and crafted. Focus on that legal argument in your structure. But important ones are speak slowly, loudly, and clearly. So Americans have a lot of trouble with the slowly part because we are native speakers. So we sort of take for granted that we can speak English well. Speak extremely slowly. If it feels weird how slow you're talking, then you're right on the money. You might be slow enough. Loudly is a problem for a lot of folks. One, because English is not your first language. So you might feel uncomfortable doing it. It's really hard to be too loud. You want to be heard, and you don't want them to have to strain to hear you, because if they have to work to hear your argument, it's difficult to believe your argument. So for those of you who are quiet, and I know there are many out there among you, I encourage you at least once, if you can do it without scaring people, just like shouting in the room that you're doing an argument in. It's very cathartic, actually, for a moment, but do your introduction yelling. I have a twin brother, and he has a stutter, and he used to have a really bad stutter. But we did karate when we were kids, and he had an instructor who, when you do performances for karate, it's like introduce yourself, tell them what you're going to do. And my brother couldn't get through it because he had a really bad stutter. And his instructor said, just scream it. And because when you're screaming it, you don't have time to be nervous when you're doing your argument. I'm not telling you to do your argument in a scream, but it can teach you how to realize I can do this all the way through loudly and comfortably. So yell out your introduction if you're someone who's afraid to be loud.
I would actually encourage you to do vocal exercises. There are certain exercises you can do to increase the projection of your voice. And a lot of teams do it when they have pleaders who are passive and soft spoken in general. So it's just like any sport, it's competitive sport. You got to do what you got to do.
Yeah, it's muscle memory. You'll get good at it. Time management, we've talked about. Land on time or request it appropriately, and help your teammates do it. Posture is actually quite important. You may not realize it right now, but when you're doing your argument, you're going to have to be like physically strong to do it. You need to sit up straight but comfortably. Both feet should be on the ground, and you should not be leaning over on the table, right? When you're leaning over on the table, you kind of look like a gorilla, and you don't mean to, because you're going to get focused and you're going to kind of go like this. So sit up straight, place your hands above the table, because if your hands are under the table, it's like, what are you doing down there? Keep them on the table and sit up straight. You'll gain muscle in like your hips and back over time as you do this. You're going to actually get stronger. And you're going to be able to do things like resist when you're making your argument and that tiny bead of sweat runs down the side of your body. You can resist it because you built up the muscles not to be like, you know. So eye contact is important. Make sure you're making eye contact with the tribunal, not looking at your notes, and look at all of us, not just the most talkative among us. Teamwork we've talked about. An important one is you're always on stage. So, for example, showing up late, which I always hate, is a problem, right? That means you're not as professional. It's hard to believe that you're professionally representing your client if you don't show up on time. When you're out and about in Vienna or around here, don't be talking bad about other teams. Don't be rude. You have to be kind to others. Same thing with the arbitrators. You have to always be acting professionally, because as lawyers, we have both professional and ethical obligations to make sure that we're serving our clients in the community well. So you have to remember you're always representing your client, even if you're not necessarily in the room making an argument.
I just want to add one thing to that point, that you're always on stage. Some students or some of us might sometimes disconnect after presenting our own argument when our co-counsel is presenting. You argue and you finish your argument, but you don't disconnect and kind of, I forgot the word in English, but think of everything else in the world while your co-counsel is presenting. When your co-counsel is presenting, you're present, which also connects to the teamwork part. So as Robbie said, you turn the pages, you show them the time, you write questions down for them. All of those things are your part, your job when your co-counsel is presenting. You don't sleep when you finish your argument. I just wanted to point that out.
Nice not to fall asleep while you're in an argument, for sure. Okay. And then finally, just some sage wisdom. We are all here for you, including all of your arbitrators. Your arbitrators are not your enemy. They are not your opponent. They're not someone who's trying to harm you or make you look bad. There are people who are here to help you show what you can do and advance your argument as you go along. Listen to the questions, believe that they are there in good faith. It will help you make arguments that are more persuasive and not be quite so scared. Be on time, please. Make as many friends as you can. This is a time for you introverts to try to shake it off. There's a lot of good studies that show that both introverted and extroverted people, of course, extroverted people already like it, but even introverted people benefit enormously from taking that risk and being able to communicate and make friends with others, even if it's difficult. You always report feeling better afterwards. So I really encourage you to make as many friends as you can. Take care of yourself. This is an easy one to forget because we're all young and dumb, including myself. You must eat. You must eat. Wake up in time to eat your food, get your breakfast. You must drink water as much as you can to stay hydrated, and you must sleep at some point, even though Vienna's a lot going on. But you must do those things because it's really hard to do well if you don't. And you'll look really pale and unwell if you're in an argument. It's hard to be persuasive that way.
You also got to eat the right stuff. For example, I had a really tough coach back in the day, and we were forbidden from eating ice cream or anything cold for that matter, because it affected the throat. So that was the intensity at which we were coached. So be mindful of what exactly you eat. Eat the good stuff, the vegetables, the carbs, the proteins, things that help you stay strong and also protect your throat.
And most importantly, you will be a better lawyer, but this is not a given. This is the kind of program that it is very hard work and there's a lot of hard work to do. But the reason why the outcome is good for you and you have such a good experience is because you put in the hard work. I have never heard of a Vismut student at any time saying, oh, I wish I didn't work so hard on that. I should have prioritized something else, right? It's always when you get to Vienna, you say, oh, I wish I had done those extra arguments. I wish I had done that more research. I wish I was more intentional about being organized. The work really matters, and it will make you a much better lawyer. There's lots of skills here that you're learning that you don't even realize will make you better at your career. For example, taking feedback is a really difficult thing to do, and y'all are going to be excellent at that because you're going to get more feedback than you've ever gotten in your entire life. and it will make you a better lawyer. You're going to be a better writer, a better oralist, and you'll be more trustworthy to your bosses. This is what this program will do for you in your career long term. And you might not even notice it until you start working and you're like, what? Why are they like that? Oh, they didn't do the Vismoot. They don't have that same experience, right? So it's 100% worth doing this kind of work. Yeah, and that's it. Do you have any other closing thoughts?
Just to add to what makes you a better lawyer, also your analytical skills. I don't think y'all realize it, but doing the Wismoot and analyzing the problem gives you a sixth sense. When you look at contracts and paperwork, you see stuff that you never saw before, and that really is a superpower. Because I've heard a lot of people say that.
Okay, any questions on how the oral argument works? Oh, hold on one second, sorry.
Hello. Good morning. So for the speaker who's going first, the one setting the stage, just he give a brief facts of the dispute or a timeline of what happened.
So generally speaking, not necessarily, but you should be prepared to do so. Some arbitrators might ask you to give a summary of the facts. So you should have a summary that's persuasive and prepared of the facts. It's uncommon, but it does happen. The most important thing is the very first pleader is the one who's going to have to give the time allocation. That's a new thing that person is going to have to do. And because there's a lot of different approaches, everyone's going to need to know how to give the time allocation. So what's going to happen is that when you get situated and everyone sat down, the presiding arbitrator is going to say, have the parties reached an agreement on the order of the proceedings? And traditionally, the first speaker is the one who says, we have decided that respondent will go first on this, followed by claimants. Respondent will go first on this, followed by claimants. We'll each have 14 minutes with 1 minute for rebuttal and surrebuttal. That's how that speech goes. But whoever speaks first is the person that's going to have to give that time allocation. Again, when you watch the arguments, pay attention to that. When you go online and watch that, pay attention to how that structure starts off, because you can really mess up how the rest of the argument will feel if we can't figure out how to do that. Here, you've got try it, right? But if you screw up, no one's going to care, right? So try to get that memorized, be able to do it, but don't think it's going to ruin anything. You're going to be completely fine. But we got to work on how to do that and get that memorized. What else? Okay, great. So we're already a little behind, but that's okay. We're switching now to the breakouts for the respondent discussion. Same rooms as last time. This is going to be the merits pleaders of the applicable law, and the procedure stuff is going to be in the other room. What time does that round officially start? Do you have someone have the schedule? At 9:30, right? This is 9 to 10:30. Okay, great. So yeah, well, let's just start right now. Go ahead and go to the other room and we'll get started right away.